All right, I'm going to call to order another on-time meeting. My record keeps going. I don't know what I'm going to do next year. I'll just show up late. The City Council successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting for May 22nd, 2023. Will everyone please, first I have to announce that there is no Assembly Bill 2449 teleconference requests. We're all here in person. So if you'll please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda from staff?
No changes this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Any changes from council? Okay. Greg, is there any report from closed session?
No reportable action from closed session tonight.
Okay. With that, I'll move on to item 6A, which is present a city coin to community volunteer Sandy Pietmeyer. All right. Do that. Okay, so this year I started as mayor giving a city coin once a month, and we have one recipient back in the room over there, and she came back, so that's a good sign. I heard she's going to stay for the whole meeting now because of that. But as I was thinking, we wanted to do something along the theme of someone who's also been involved with Hometown Days, since we just came off a great Hometown Days weekend. And in talking to Amy and her team and thinking about it, and Sandy obviously came to mind for not just her Hometown Days work, but everything she does for the community. So she was definitely the most excited person I've ever talked to, saying, "I want to give you this coin." I thought the phone was going to hit the ground. So Sandy's been a San Carlos resident for 40 years. She as many know, worked at White Oak School as the school secretary for 27 years, and she claims she loved every minute of it.
I did.
And retired in 2016. She has been a volunteer for Hometown Days as of this year for 23 years. Her partner in crime, Kathy Eitel, is there taking tickets for the beer booth. I will say that I've never gotten a free ticket from them, ever. They're very hardcore. She's also co-chaired the Chickens Ball in 1998 and again in 2002, and she started volunteering there in 1988. She is part of the Lions Club and has the pleasure of heading the Easter egg hunt, which is free to all residents. She gives some good plugs in there along the way for the last 2 years. And her special project for the Lions Club has been the St. Francis Center, where she has led the Christmas Present Project and Mother's Day Present Project. And she also volunteers with the San Carlos Park and Rec Foundation, and many more people should join that group. And all these groups are all great ways to contribute to the community. We definitely benefit from people like Sandy and the volunteers that really make us the city of good living. And I'm happy to present you with the city coin as a thank you for all your work. No. Try not to do that.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. That's really pretty. Thank you.
All right, and we'll welcome you to say a few words.
Very few, too, by the way. I'm really good speaking when it's a small group. Thanks. First of all, I'm honored to receive this recognition for doing things that I do absolutely love. How lucky to live in a town that offers so many opportunities for us to get involved. By volunteering, the one thing I love is that I've met so many wonderful people. Oh, and by the way, I'd like to just give a shout out. City staff, Hometown Days was unbelievable. I think we had the largest crowd we've had in a long time. But I wanted to give you some of my memories from volunteering. Delivering groceries to our older residents and having the opportunity to chat with them and their memories of San Carlos. Sending holiday cards to our residents living in assisted living. Kids running and finding Easter eggs and filling their baskets, and then getting to meet the Easter Bunny and being frightened. Seeing the excitement and anticipation for waiting for the holiday lights to turn on, and snow falling in San Carlos. Knowing that my acting alone has been the best, knowing that Chickens Ball, and they knew that I could not act, but they let me come anyway. Everyone at some point should volunteer in this city. There are so many opportunities, and look at the fabulous people that you get to meet. Thank you.
All right, congratulations again, Sandy. I'm happy to take any, if anyone has any comments. I see Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I told Sandy I was going to embarrass her, but I'm not really going to do that. But I think I've known Sandy for probably 30 years, and it all goes back to Chickens Ball. It's kind of sad that that particular show is sort of faded in the importance of people who live in San Carlos, but that really, in my opinion, was sort of the glue that held everything together. And Sandy was involved in that. I think, pretty sure you were involved in the White Oak skit, which I was in. But when I think of someone who has just been a constant factor all these years, it's Sandy. Lots of people volunteer for lots of things for very short periods of time. She's volunteered for everything for long periods of time. And to me, that's sort of the epitome of what this town is. So if there's anybody who exemplifies what this town truly is, it's Sandy. And so thank you, Sandy. You've been wonderful, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. Any other comments? Okay, is there any public comment on this item?
No, I don't have any hands.
Okay, all right. Well, we will move on to item 6B, which is present a proclamation recognizing May 21 to 27, 2023 as Public Works Week. All right, and this, I mean, I will say before I read this, this year has been a rough year with the storms, and our Public Works team has been just phenomenal, day in out, working nonstop. So, separate from this proclamation, thanks to you, Stephen, and your team. So, recognizing May 21 to May 27, 2023 is National Public Works Week, connecting the world through public works. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the city of San Carlos. And whereas these infrastructure, facilities, and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our nation's transportation, water supply, water treatment, and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our community. And whereas San Carlos Public Works professionals are unsung heroes because they do their job so well, they're generally unrecognized by the public at large. And whereas recognizing public works is especially significant this year with their tireless work in responding to and repairing damages from the extensive flooding, fallen trees, and mudslides caused by the atmospheric river storms this winter. And whereas it is in the public interest for our civic leaders and community gain to gain knowledge of and to maintain a progressive interest and understanding of the importance of public works and the public works programs. And whereas the year 2023 marks the 63rd annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association, to recognize the dedicated employees who safeguard our public infrastructure Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Adam Rack, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, on behalf of the entire City Council, hereby proclaim the week of May 21 to 27, 2023, as National Public Works Week in the City of San Carlos, and urge our community to pay tribute to our public works professionals and to recognize the substantial contributions they make to protecting our health, safety, and quality of life in the City of Good Living. Congratulations. Thank you. And then I have one other comment to make too after. Because I have the mic after. Then you can say your thing, Stephen. And the other thing I just want to say that I've been raving about to everyone, I think everyone knows, is the change of the orange water barriers. And that was just ingenuity from, Public Works to go in. I mean, as I understand, it went to Home Depot, built those, and I've only heard really great comments about that. So I appreciate on top of everything else you do, figuring out how to make that work in a way that helps better our community as well. So thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor and City Council members, on behalf of all Public Works staff, I would like to say thank you for recognizing May 21st through the 22nd as National Public Works Week. Certainly, it really has been a pleasure serving you as well as the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, do any of my colleagues have any comments? Okay, how about any public comments?
No, we don't have any hands.
Okay, with that, I'll move to council communications and announcements. And this is a good time to cut out if you want. I'm going to start doing these at the end of the meeting, so you have to be there the whole time.
The exciting part is just about to begin.
All right, well, that I'll go to council communications and announcements. Council Member McDowell.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to give a shout out to our staff about Hometown Days. As Sandy mentioned, it was just an excellent turnout. Public Works staff was out there working weeks before, doing mulch and flowers and making our parks look beautiful. And I know that so many of our staff were out there working the whole weekend. Some brought their parents to work. So I just wanted to say thank you. It was a really wonderful weekend. And thank you to all the volunteers as well who stepped up and volunteered to make it successful. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Venkatesh.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to echo the same. Thank you for amazing Hometown Days. It was so crowded, and everyone seemed to be having a great time, and it just felt like so much of the community was coming together and having a great time, so thank you.
Vice Mayor Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, obviously echo that. Great hometown day, great turnout, lots of happy people in the park. Just love it. And also a special shout out for all the cornhole improvements. We lost a tree and it was a sad day, and now it's like, wow, we got benches and hardscape, and that's pretty awesome over there, and it's definitely been noticed. And then I'll just share, after Hometown Days, I found myself walking by 817 Walnut. That's the 100% affordable, very low income project that many of us were at the ribbon cutting for last year. And walking by it Saturday night, I just, it was like a beautiful night. It was all framed. The building looked great. And then I noticed, wow, up in one of the windows, there was a congrats grad sign with kind of, the fancy kind of balloon letters or something. And, I have a graduate at my house at the moment, and it just, I don't know, it just touched me that, here's this new project, open less than a year, and just, it was just a very touching moment to see that, there's a family celebrating a graduation right there, and just made me glad for the work we've been doing on housing. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Dugan. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo everyone else's comments. It was a wonderful weekend. I also want to combine my congratulations to staff on a great weekend with my congratulations to Public Works. You guys have done an incredible job over the last 6 months, very hard, difficult conditions, and it's truly appreciated. So it was, and it was a great weekend. I did have an unsolicited comment from a friend yesterday while I was watching the Ticket to Ride Beatles tribute band. She turned around and told me how much she loved those new planter boxes at either end of Laurel. So she said it was a wonderful improvement. And I said, well, more to come. So thank you again.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. I just want to also echo what a great hometown days it was. I know how exhausted I was afterwards, and I did about a minimal amount compared to everyone else. So thank you for all the work. The park looked amazing, Stephen and your team, and for all the prep work and all the work from everyone down from the administrative services to the park and rec team, and really all the community volunteers. So many people from the staff have played a role in making this happen, and it's been a fairly smooth transition. I've heard from so many people how great it is, and what a great event it is. So, and I think I got to ride in the coolest car in the parade. So with that, I will turn to public comment. These are items people wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. If there are more than 5 individuals wishing to speak during the public comment, the mayor may choose to allow the first 5 speakers to speak during this time. The balance of the public comment speakers will be called upon at the end of the council meeting. Crystal, are there any public comment for items not on the agenda?
I do not have any hands.
Okay.
Thank you.
And nothing in the chambers. With that, I will move to item 9, the consent calendar. These are items voted en masse. Does anyone wish to pull anything from the consent calendar? Okay, anyone from the public? Okay, with that, I'd be happy to take a motion on the consent calendar.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve City Council consent calendar items A through N.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Crystal, can you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Venkatesh?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dugan?
Yes.
And Mayor Beck?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the consent calendar passes 5-0. Now moving on to item 10, reports to council. We'll receive a report on the results of the 2023 Citizen Opinion Survey conducted by True North Research, and that will be done by Niall Blackburn, our Assistant City Manager, and Dr. Timothy McLarney, President of True North Research, remote.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Niall Blackburn, Assistant City Manager. For this item, 10A, staff requests that the council receive a report on the results of the 2023 Citizen Opinion Survey. Every year since 2018, staff has hired a professional consultant to conduct a scientific survey for the city on the community. And we conduct 2 types of surveys. One is called the Citizen Opinion Survey, and that survey looks at how the community perceives the city is doing with regard to its goals and providing services, and we try to get a sense of what the community's priorities are. The second survey type is called the Community Characteristics Survey, and we did that last year and received a report last year, and that looks more at changing demographics, lifestyle of the community, how they work, how they use transportation, and so forth. Both surveys are used to help inform the budgeting process and help the council and staff make strategic decisions, such as what our priorities are, what our goals are, and so forth. So what we have for you next is the results of the Citizen Opinion Survey. It was last conducted in 2021, so we'll have an opportunity to look at some apples-to-apples comparisons. And Timothy McLarney, PhD, is on Zoom to present the report and to take you through the methodology, share some of the questions with you, and answer any questions that you have.
Great. Well, thank you, Niall, and good evening, Mayor, members of council. Tim McLarney with True North Research. As Niall mentioned, the city has engaged in community surveys for a number of different topics over the years. I've had the privilege of working with the city on a lot of these surveys. And so when I go through tonight's presentation, you're going to see the results of the 2023 Citizen Opinion Survey. And for many of the questions, we're also going to be showing comparison data, in some cases going back about a decade. And so, which is great. It's one of the neat things about these studies is that you have this sort of rich history of data so that you get a good snapshot of sort of where you are today, but also how that compares to where you've been. As I go through the presentation, I welcome questions from council as I go or at the end, whichever is your preference. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we talk about the results, help me take a quick moment to review the methodology or how we went about conducting the study. We're using the same methodology this cycle as we've been using the last couple of cycles. We start out in terms of how you select your residents. We use what's called a stratified random sample of adult residents within the community. Although we start with this randomized sample, we also recognize that, during data collection, there's certain groups that tend to respond at higher rates than others. And so we have to sort of watch the progression of the data collection and make sure we make some adjustments as we're in the field so that at the end, we're sort of compensating for some of that response bias and we wind up with a sample that in fact aligns with what we understand the demographics of San Carlos residents are based on census estimates. So once we have selected that sample in terms of recruiting, we're using 3 different methods of recruiting. These days we're using email, text, and telephone, typically in that sequence, sort of from least intrusive to most intrusive. Both the email and the text invitations have built into them a hyperlink that the respondent can click, come in and take the survey. Each one of those hyperlinks has an embedded sort of ID number in it. That way we know that, okay, this is in fact somebody that we've sent an invitation to. It allows them to take the survey one time. Once they've taken that survey, that invitation can't be forwarded on to a bunch of other people to take it. So it allows us to control the integrity of the study in that way. Respondents can participate online at a website. It scales to the device. So whether you're on a phone or a tablet or a computer, it automatically adjusts to that. And for those who prefer to take it by telephone, we still do that as well. Both landlines and mobiles have the opportunity to take it by telephone. So we set out, I think, to do 600 to complete this cycle. We wound up with 721. So we're walking back in the door with a few more interviews than we had set out to do, just because we always have to sort of make an estimate of what we think the productivity is going to be, and the response rate in the community was stronger than what we had estimated. And so we're walking back in with extra interviews. And now, because this was a random sample of 721 and not a census of all of your adult residents in the community, it has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. In this case, it's 3.6%. What that means is we can be 95% confident that the results I'll speak with and share with you tonight are within 3.6% of what we would have found had we spoken with all adult residents. Next slide, please. Okay, so on to the results. This first slide here shows the results of a question where we ask residents to rate the overall quality of life in San Carlos, where they say it's excellent, good, fair, poor, or very poor. You can see here in 2023, you had 91% of your residents rate the overall quality of life as excellent or good. That is actually really consistent going back over time. You can see here we've got about a decade's worth of data here, and it's a really flat line in your community, more so than what we typically see. In particular, the last few years, as we all know, have been very challenging between the pandemic itself and then sort of the aftermath of the pandemic. We have high gas prices, inflation. I got issues around affordability of housing. You have what's been a bit of a challenging time sort of from either fires or floods and things like that. So it's been sort of a difficult number of years. And so in a lot of the community surveys we've done, we're seeing that reflect in some of the data. And yet here in San Carlos, what you're seeing is that despite all this sort of turbulence that's been happening over the last few years, residents still sort of view their city the same way in terms of the overall quality of life, which is great. The other thing to note is if you dig behind the 2023 results and you look at how they break down by things like how long somebody's lived in San Carlos, how old they are, where they have children in the household, et cetera, different demographics. What you find is there's a lot of consistency across the board in terms of the sort of high perception of quality of life in the community. The percent who rate it as excellent or good ranges from a low of 86% to a high of 95% across these various subgroups. So that's also kind of an unusual finding to see if that's consistent. Next slide, please. So after that overall quality of life question, we go on to ask if the city government could change one thing to make San Carlos a better place to live now and in the future. What change would you like to see? This question is posed in an open-ended manner, and what we mean by that is we ask the question and then we're quiet. We get to let them tell us in their own words kind of what's the change that they'd most like to see to improve the city. We then went back and reviewed all those verbatim responses and grouped them into the categories that you see here. So at the top of the list, about 15% mentioned limiting growth and development as the number one issue that they'd like to see addressed. Then you had about 10% who mentioned improving or maintaining infrastructure. 9% sort of took the opposite side of growth and development, talked about the importance of providing more and additional affordable housing in the community. And then about 8% mentioned reducing traffic congestion. If you look at these results over time, new to the 2023 top 5 were 2 topics. One is improving infrastructure. That was not in the top 5 in the past. It was in the top 5 this cycle. And the other was adding and improving sidewalks and bike lanes. So those 2 are new to the top 5. The others have been there previously. Next slide, please. Okay, so from sort of a resident satisfaction perspective, this slide in some ways is the most important slide that we'll talk about because it's the answers to the question. Generally speaking, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the job the city of San Carlos is doing to provide city services? We're asking residents to talk about your performance overall and in general. We're not sort of digging in specific service areas at this point. And in that respect, it can be viewed as an overall performance rating for the city. So in 2023, you see you had 83% of your residents indicate that they were satisfied. You had about 10% who were dissatisfied, and the rest were unsure. Here is another slide that, from my perspective, because I get to do this a lot for a lot of public agencies, it is remarkable in the sense that here again, when you think about what the last sort of 4 years have looked like, with the pandemic forcing cities to sort of reinvent how they provide services, the challenges in terms of the economy, the challenges in terms of sort of natural events, et cetera. It's by just about any standard been a difficult 4 years. And yet, when you look at the results here on this slide, you wouldn't know that was going on in the background because the level of satisfaction your residents have for the city's overall performance has really not changed much at all during this period. That is unusual. Most of the communities in which we've been doing these studies have sort of seen a step down over the last few cycles in resident satisfaction, in part because of a reflection of everything else that's been going on in the background and how that's sort of impacted cities' abilities to meet residents' needs. And so really remarkable result, very unusual result, and something I think to be proud of. Next slide, please. So that last slide was looking at overall satisfaction with the city's efforts to provide city services. Here now we drill down into all of the specific service areas you see here on this slide, and we essentially ask the same question: how satisfied or dissatisfied are they with the city's efforts to provide a specific service? These are asked in a random order, but we sorted them from high to low based on that combined percentage of folks who said they're either very or somewhat satisfied. And you can see at the top of the list, you sort of have different tranches here. There's quite a few of your service areas that have 90+% of residents tell us that they're satisfied with the city's efforts in this area. Providing library services, for example, at the top of the list, 97% satisfied. Providing trash and collection recycling services and keeping buildings and facilities clean and attractive on down. All of those test exceptionally well. You have, a group in the middle there that's, more in sort of the 75 to 80 range. If you go all the way to the bottom, there's a few that stand out for having lower levels of satisfaction, comparatively speaking to the others. Providing affordable housing, that one checks in at around 50% satisfied. Reducing traffic congestion on city streets, as well as then maintaining storm drain sewers and creeks. Now, if you compare these results to the last time we did this study, there were 4 statistically significant changes. You had 2 areas that increased significantly in overall satisfaction. That was providing more public parking downtown and reducing traffic congestion on city streets. Both of those satisfaction increased over the last couple of years. In terms of decreases in satisfaction, you had about 5% fewer say they were satisfied with the city's efforts to maintain a low crime rate. And the big change is with respect to maintaining storm drains, sewers, and creeks. That went down about 25 points. So I don't think there's a big mystery around that. As I was, sitting here listening to the council meeting start before this item came up, we had a very difficult, challenging wet winter, and that caused some problems in terms of storm drains and flooding. And so I'm sure that's that item is sort of a reflection of what we saw this past winter. Next slide, please. So in addition to asking residents to comment on specific service areas, the survey also sort of steps back and asks them to comment on the city's sort of performance from a local governance perspective. So, how much do they trust the city of San Carlos? How do they view the city in terms of how it manages its finances? How responsive do they see that the city is to residents' needs, as well as do they perceive that the city listens to residents when making important decisions? And those are those bars there that you see here in the graphic. And you see that overall about 80% of respondents said, yes, I trust the city of San Carlos and the city manages its finances well. This is of people have an opinion. And then you have about 70% who agreed that the city is responsive to residents' needs, and 63% agreed that the city listens to residents when making important decisions. Here, when you look at these numbers compared to where you were 2 years ago, all of them moved in a positive direction from where they were past. The magnitude of those changes wasn't enough to make them statistically significant changes, but it's nice to see that they're all sort of trending in the positive direction. Next slide, please. And we went on also to ask about residents' interactions with city staff and their assessment of staff in terms of their professionalism, accessibility, and helpfulness. About 39% of respondents had actually interacted with city staff in the past 2 years. And so for those individuals, we asked them to rate staff on these dimensions. And you can see that 94% who rated staff as professional, 91% as accessible, and 86% as helpful. So really good numbers. Here again, when you compare the results to where we were 2 years ago, all of these have trended up in terms of scores, so more positive than they were 2 years ago. But the magnitude of the change was not enough to be statistically significant. Next slide, please. So we saw earlier in the presentation that sort of issues of either growth and development were kind of hot topics, as well as housing. And so in the survey, we took the opportunity to get an understanding of how residents view the current sort of inventory of housing in the city. And we also know that, it's one thing to talk about housing in general, but once you start parsing housing into various types of housing and for what purposes that housing is geared, you tend to get different answers. And so for each of the types of housing you see there on the left-hand side of the slide, we simply asked residents to tell us, when you look at San Carlos currently, is there too little of this type of housing in the community? Is the amount about right, or is there too much? And you can see at the very top of the list, there's two categories where a majority of residents think there's just not enough of this housing in the community currently. And that's housing that's affordable for middle-income families and housing that's affordable for low-income families. Beyond that, all the other categories, the dominant answer was that it's about right. The current amount of inventory is about right. But you still see that to the extent that, if you sort of isolate the people who think it's either not enough or too much, it still leans as there's not enough of this. So interim housing to help people trying to transition from being homeless, you had 32% say there's not enough of that in the community. Special needs housing for families and individuals need support services and job training and social services, similar amount, about 32% say there's not enough there. So it gives you a sense of kind of not only sort of the views on affordable housing in the community, but to the extent that you're looking at housing that serves certain needs, how your residents view these categories. Next slide, please. Continuing on with the topic of sort of housing and development. So we saw again earlier that for some folks, limiting growth and development was the number one issue for them. They're sort of their hot button. But over the time, we have also asked residents over the past 3 years, would you say the pace of development in San Carlos has been too fast, about right, or too slow? And so you can see here the results to that answer dating back to 2016. And what we see in 2023 is you had about 39% of residents say that the pace of development in the community in the past 3 years is too fast. About 41% think it's about right. 12% think you're not growing fast enough, and the rest being unsure. Sort of two comments here. You see one thing that over the past couple of cycles, going back to 2020, what you're seeing is there's significantly fewer residents saying that the community is growing too fast. In 2020, that was at 55%. This cycle, it's at 39%. The other thing I'll point out that you can't see it in this slide, but in the full report, you'll see the breakdowns by different subgroups. The answers to this question tend to vary quite a bit based on two factors: how long somebody's lived in the community, as well as age. You tend to find that your older residents, as well as your longtime residents, are more likely to say that the pace of development is too fast. Your younger residents and your newer residents are, more likely to see that being a little more balanced. They're less likely to say that the pace of development is going too fast. Next slide, please. So the city of San Carlos, like most cities, has a limited budget and probably a seemingly unlimited list of things you could spend it on. Because of that, you have to set your priorities in terms of where you direct your resources. And so we take the opportunity in this survey to let residents sort of speak on this issue, that, of all the ways that the city could be directing funds in the future, which of these do they think should be high priorities, which should be medium priorities, which should be low priorities, and which of these shouldn't be a priority for future city spending, to encourage respondents to kind of prioritize here. We tell them that not everything can be a high priority, right? The point is to inject some competition into this question so that they have to make some decisions about which of these things are ultimately the most important to them and which are a little lower on the list. And so you can see here on this slide, top of the list is really a combination sort of public safety and public works issues. So fire protection services, street maintenance and repair, infrastructure maintenance and repair, park and landscape maintenance, police services. Those all sort of combine to be in that top 5 in terms of overall priorities. When you get down to the bottom here, you see things like community outreach, including meetings and mailings, public transportation and housing programs. It isn't that residents don't see value in these things, they do, but remember, we've purposely made this a bit of a competition in the way that the question is phrased, and so they're having to kind of make a decision about, ultimately which of these are their top priorities. Next slide, please. Okay, shifting gears, new for the 2023 community survey was this question, where we asked individuals sort of in a similar way to where we're talking about housing, for each of the community, sort of recreational community amenities you see there on that slide. We wanted them to tell us, is the amount in the community not enough currently? Is it about right, or are there too many? This is a really unusual finding because most of the time when you ask this question, pools tend to be kind of towards the bottom of the list, right, in terms of what residents care about or are concerned about. And yet in San Carlos, what you see is you had 63% of respondents say that there's not enough public swimming pools in the community. Everything else you can see sort of pales by comparison. 25% mentioned not enough restrooms and parks, 23% mentioned picnic areas, et cetera. So there seems to be this large sort of unmet demand for swimming pools, whereas when you look at a lot of the other amenities, the dominant answer is that it's about the right amount currently. Next slide, please. Here's another very unusual pattern to your data. So we asked respondents to tell us how satisfied or dissatisfied they are with the city's efforts to communicate with residents through newsletters, social media, email, the city's website, and other means. And in 2023, you had 84% of your residents say that they were satisfied with these communication efforts. This is just a highly unusual finding when you look at how flat that line is over time. Communication is an area where most cities and public agencies have struggled over the last sort of 8 to 10 years because just in terms of the environment has changed in terms of communication. Used to be that, you know, everyone sort of read the same newspapers, watched the same television shows, listened to the same radio programs, and it was a comparatively easy task to actually reach out and talk to residents. You know, with social media, the explosion of different websites, pretty much everyone's getting their information from different sources. And what we've seen is that's created a lot of challenges for public agencies in actually being able to reach their residents and communicate messages. And consequently, for most cities, what you've seen over time is this stepping down of resident satisfaction with the city's efforts to communicate with them, because number one, they're just harder to find. And number two, their expectations in some ways about the immediacy of communications has really changed. And yet, when you look here in San Carlos, these numbers are remarkably stable. 84% satisfied in 2023. That is similar to the levels going back all the way to 2014. So there has been no step down in San Carlos. And, you know, the reality is you're having to swim harder and faster upstream against some of these, you know, sort of changing dynamics in the world of communication. So to achieve this result, then perhaps you were even in the past. So my hat's off to you for that. Again, very unusual finding. Next slide, please. Now, with that in mind, though, and wanting to make sure you're always staying ahead of the curve, we had asked individuals in the survey to tell us how effective each one of the communication channels you see here on this slide is with respect to the city's ability to communicate with them. So, you know, as you see here at the top of the list, newsletters mailed to your home still perceived to be a very effective method for communicating with residents. You had about 85% of your residents say that would be at least a somewhat effective method, followed by email, newsletters sent by email, and then the city's website and text messages. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm wrapping up. I've got about 3 slides here. So what does all this mean? There's a full report available. It's a ton of information above and beyond what I shared with you today. And I go into a lot of detail in that report about what these results mean. So I'll try and just sum up here. I think the first sort of real takeaway is, again, keeping in mind the context, right? You always want to think of survey as a snapshot in time. So it's important to understand kind of the events and what the context was for when you're surveying. And despite the fact that the last few years have been, you know, extremely challenging in a lot of ways, you know, you wouldn't in many ways know that was happening by staring at your survey results. You've done a remarkable job of sort of keeping this ship on a straight course and steady through what has been, you know, some stormy times. And the fact that your overall quality of life ratings still are just as high today as they were, you know, a number of years ago, pre-pandemic, that your overall performance rating in providing municipal services is still high and steady. You know, when you look at how residents view the city itself, as well as your staff's performance and meeting their needs. And then finally, as I just mentioned on a couple slides ago, the fact that throughout all this and all the challenges that have sort of cropped up over the last few years in terms of city resident communication, your scores for city resident communication are every bit as strong today as they've been in the past. I mean, that's just, you know, it is truly a remarkable sort of set of patterns, and you know, it's something that doesn't happen by accident. Right? You have to work hard and earn these scores. And so, you know, as far as a report card goes, I mean, this is kind of a report card you're hoping to get. Next slide, please. Some of the areas that the city has performed particularly well in, you see here on this slide, library service, trash recycling, et cetera. You know, there's, you know, pretty much across the board, you were getting strong marks, but these are the areas where the city was performing the best. And then next slide, please. So, like all resident satisfaction surveys or customer satisfaction surveys, it should be a bit about kind of where are we today and how are we performing today, but also where, looking to the future, we might be able to improve. And so in scanning across the survey results, the items you see are on these bullets are probably the areas where you have the best opportunity to make improvements. And increase resident satisfaction even further. It isn't because the city's not performing well in these areas. I mean, they are. Many of these areas had clear majority of residents say that they were satisfied with the city's performance, but relative to all the other things or service areas where we tested where you had even stronger results, these sort of show up as they're sort of low hanging fruit. They're the items where you do have a little more opportunity to improve resident satisfaction. So that is the end of my presentation. I welcome questions from council if there are any.
Okay, thank you, Dr. McLarney, for the thorough presentation. I will see if I see two. I'll start with Vice Mayor Dugan and then Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I only have one question. How many times did Councilmember Collins call into this survey to vote for a swimming pool?
At most, he could do it one time.
Very good, very good. Good answer. Thank you. That's all I had.
Right. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The answer is none. The survey did come in the mail to my wife. I told her to fill it out, and I don't know if she did, so it's an honest answer. But Tim, thank you. You always give us really enlightening reports. In a lot of cases, there are things that pop up that are not surprising. But there was one of the things that you talked about made me wonder when the survey was conducted. And I think it was like in the last 90 days or so, was it not?
Yeah, let me get that to you here. The report was delivered in May. The data collection was done between April 5th and April 17th.
Okay, all right, thank you. That makes sense. I think it had something to do with the comments about, public works and cleanup and that sort of thing and storm damage. One thing that kind of stuck out at me was that on that slide 9, where you asked opinions about the amount of housing in San Carlos, and like, what was it? I can't read that. It's like 58% said there was too little affordable housing. But then on a couple slides later, when it looks like funding priorities, housing programs is like third from the bottom. I mean, people seem to think that we don't have enough housing, but they don't really care to do much about it. Is that the way? I mean, is that the way you interpret it?
So I'm glad you're asking, looking at from a couple different angles here, because it's always important to keep in mind the way the question was asked, right? So very early in the survey, even before that, we had that question about what's the one change you would make to improve, the quality of life in San Carlos. You had about 10% of people comment on housing affordability, right? So for about 10% of your residents, this is a burning issue. It's the number one thing on their mind when I think about the community. When you get to slide 9, where it's showing how they, comment on the event, what's the current sort of inventory of these types of housing, you can see that about, 50 to 58% of residents sort of, when asked to sort of look at, the amount of housing out there, will acknowledge that there's not enough, right? So they're being descriptive, right? But then if you ask them in the priorities question, kind of, if you stack up affordable housing next to a lot of these other things and ask them, look, we have limited resources, we can only do so much, and so how would you prioritize? For a lot of those same people, fire protection is more important, street maintenance and road repairs are more important, right? Police services is more important. So that's really, there are 3 different questions, and it's always important to keep in mind what question is being asked, because you're right, housing goes from being sort of high on the list, low on the list, and depending on the way you ask the question and what the context is.
Thank you for giving some context to that. Then the last question I had was, on that slide 12, availability, recreational, community amenities, how did you ask those questions? Did you give them that list, or did you say, what are we missing, or what amenities would you like to see? Was it more open-ended, or was it like a list?
We gave them that list. So
You gave
we
them that
said
list, okay.
For each one of those, we had them tell us, is there not enough of this in San Carlos? Is the amount about right? Or is there too many? Right?
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Collins. Councilmember McDowell.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Dr. McClarney, for your presentation and for doing this research. I think this is really important data for the council to keep in mind. I had a similar question to Ron's about the housing, again on slide 9, just kind of looking at how a vast majority of people thought that all the different kinds of housing, duplexes, apartments, condos, townhomes, are all about right. And we can't increase affordable housing without building those. So is that kind of an answer that you hear from other communities as well when you're doing these surveys in other cities?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you point that out, and I had sort of had that in my notes too. And you know, when you look at the top of the list, it's really about housing that serves a certain need, right? So affordable housing for middle-income families, affordable housing for low-income families, interim housing for homeless, special needs housing. Anytime you're sort of pinning it to a group, they tend to see that, oh, there's not enough of this, right? More so. Then if you get to the bottom, it's all just the type of housing unit. It's single family, townhome, condo, apartment, right? It's not earmarked for any particular purpose or, you know, subgroup. And that's kind of I think the explanation. That the moment you kind of talk about housing that's serving a certain need, they're willing to, you know, they tend to, you know, are more likely to see that there's not enough of that.
Okay, great.
And I think what this means though is like, look, there's another way to look at this is to say something like, we don't need more townhomes that aren't affordable, right? What we need are townhomes that would be affordable for middle income or low income families.
Great. Okay. Messaging is important. Okay. Very good. Thank you. And then my second question, I think this might really be more for staff. It has to do with our opportunity for improvement for city-provided resources and facilities during PG&E power shutoffs. And I thought that was kind of interesting that it makes sense because during the storms, I know a lot of our residents found refuge in the library, and the library was really crowded, and kids were trying to finish term papers and use the internet. Is this something that we're going to start talking about as a city, given this result of how we could improve in that area?
I'm going to ask a question. What was the context of that question? Do you remember, Dr. McLarney? Where did that come up?
That was in the specific list of services, so it would be it's going to be on.
Okay, so I think it was about what do we do if there's a power shutoff by PG&E, and what kind of services can we provide in the event of a power outage?
Slide number 6.
6, okay.
On here, and the way it is we were simply asking, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the city's efforts to provide a variety of these services? One of them was providing, having city facilities available during peak, so 4,000 a month.
Thank you. I think what we've been doing is often saying this is a PG&E issue and trying to explain to folks and do a lot of education on PG&E's function versus the city government. I see that city manager might be able to help me out here. Thanks.
Yeah. That is in fact one of the primary reasons we do this survey is to look for those community priorities, that especially ones like that might not be readily apparent to us on a day-to-day basis. You know, I can remember in 2014 when we talked about doing this survey for the first time, it was kind of scary. You know, it's kind of scary to go out and ask for a report card from, 30,000 people that you don't know personally. But I'm a firm believer in if you don't ask, you can't improve. It's all part of our philosophy here about communicating with the public. And, you know, we have to be willing to ask the public how we're doing and what do they need, and to find out about them so we can best serve them. So many of the things today, many of the reasons why we've bucked some of the trends that other cities have struggled with over the last decade is because we're asking the question of the community. How can we do better? That's why we're all here, you know, to make our communities better. And so we definitely look at this data and look for the opportunities, you know, especially things like that are kind of low-hanging fruit, you know, to do better in our community. And we know what a priority that is of the city council, to listen to the public and to try to always do better. And, you know, rather than be threatened by that, you know, we celebrate it here. And I think, you know, we see the results once again tonight and look forward to testing ourselves again in 2 years.
And may I just add, in addition, that we do have a zero power communications process, and we also have various communications on what to do during a PG&E outage. I think what we need to do is perhaps send out those postcards and mailers in advance of storm season and get ahead of the issue. And we tend to do a lot of it online, but what we're seeing is sending to homes is probably the better route. So maybe we get more proactive with that.
Okay, thank you, Niall. I'll just add, I appreciate both of those explanations. The way I read that was like having more city facilities available. So like the ACC open and doing grab-and-go meals, or like welcoming people in to where there is power, where they can warm up. And because I know a lot of our residents were without power for several days. So just something to think about as the city manager was talking about. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember McDowell. Councilmember Venkatesh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Dr. McLarney. I just had a quick question. On slide 4, if you could just explain the changes to improve San Carlos limit growth, it's pretty high at 15%. And then on slide 10, the pace of development, it's pretty high. So I'm just wondering what that was, if you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, here again, it's the way the questions are asked, which I think where the first question is, what's the one change that you would make to improve the overall quality of life in San Carlos? So it's whatever is top of mind, and what that says is for 15% of residents, the top of mind thing for them is, I wish we could limit growth and development in the community. Whereas there was another 9% who said we need more affordable housing, right? So it's whatever their most important issue was to them. When you get to this question, you're asking everybody, about specifically the pace of development in the community over the past 3 years. And so obviously the 15% of people who felt that limiting growth and development was the number one issue in the community, they're factored into that 39% that you see there on the far left at the bottom. And then the rest sort of scatter out according to whatever their natural opinions are. So that's how you look at that issue. The first one was just about what's the most important issue facing the community. This one's just about describe what they see as the pace of growth over the past 3 years.
Thank you, Councilmember Venkatesh. Okay, I have a few questions for you as well. Some of them did get answered, but I guess can you just click on that? Sort of stuck on that slide 4 as well, Dr. McLarney. Just so I understand, so the limit growth development, was that just generic, or is it specific to housing and commercial, or how does that, is there a breakdown of that at all?
It's it's a mix of all of that, right? For some people, it's just, we're growing too fast, there's too much development, and it could be, specific to commercial, or just be, talk about development in general or housing. 15%, one thing I will say is 15%, it's the number one issue in your community when you ask in this format, but 15% isn't really a large number for a number one. Mm-hmm. A lot of communities I work with, the one at the top of the list is 30% plus. And in a lot of those communities, it's homelessness as that issue. So, when you think about sort of hot button issue, that's an issue where you have at least 1 out of 5 of your residents saying the same thing. You don't have any issues that are like that in your community. It's kind of spread out over a bunch of different issues. Yeah, limiting growth and development is kind of a grab bag of lots of different verbatim responses that have to essentially do with, they don't like the fact that, there's more development happening in the community.
Okay, that's helpful. And can you remind me then, for these questions, are these open-ended, or did they come in with, so these are open-ended in terms of,
Yes.
you just sort of say,
So-
what is your number one way to change or improve San Carlos? Is that sort of
Yeah.
the phrasing? What's the phraseology of that question?
It is, if the city government could change one thing to make San Carlos a better place to live now and in the future, what change would you like to see? They then got to either, if they're on the phone, tell us in their own words. If they're online, they type it into the text box. And then what we did is went back and reviewed all of those 721 responses and then categorized their verbatims according to the issue that they're hitting on.
Okay.
And that's how you get the distribution you see here.
Okay. I appreciate that. It's helpful to understand it, because for me, I struggle with this chart because I feel like these should be categorized more closely, right? I mean, I look at that and I see improved public safety, increased police presence, faster response, enforced traffic laws. To me, that number is like over, I think it's like it's like over 16. So to me, that area, sort of that category is a high priority, even though it's sort of dispersed throughout here and doesn't sort of rise to the top. Same thing with some things around downtown or the infrastructure. To me, infrastructure is the same as sidewalks and bike lanes. Those are part of infrastructure. And so I struggle to say that limit growth is the top priority for that versus some of these other things that are, to me, either have more or right at that level.
Yeah, I mean, you raise an important point in that whenever you're looking at these lists, we try and disaggregate it as much as possible so that, it's helpful for the reader to see that, not everything about public safety is about, police. Sometimes it's about other issues. Sometimes it's about enforcing traffic laws. Is a little different, right? And so we're trying to disaggregate it. But you're right. You can go through here and start rolling up if you want to sort of collapse categories. And sometimes when you do that, then sort of issues around public safety, for example, might be at the top of the list. Right?
Okay. Yeah, and I think for us, I mean, it would be helpful, as sort of a follow-up to kind of have that roll up to some degree, to have a little bit more, and whether that's done by staff or, as a follow-up with you, to just have a better sort of coercing of certain ideas and areas. It would be helpful for me, at least, as we think about funding priorities and other things, to do that. So I appreciate your response, and that's helpful to understand from my end. But other than that, I appreciate all the work on this. It's certainly helpful for me to see this and to understand kind of where things are, and the fact that we've gotten good results year over year. I mean, we're doing something right, so which is a good thing. So I will, Vice Mayor Dugan had a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. And it is
Demoted.
What's that?
You just called me Vice Mayor.
Oh, is
I got
that right? I'm
demoted
sorry.
already.
I was reflecting. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. It's a good survey, good result, and thank you, Dr. McLarney. The data over time is very useful. I'm on slide 10 is my question, and this is, I'm just struck by between 2020 and 2023, three-year period, a 16-point drop in people who decided or who felt our pace of development was too fast. And that's just surprising to me because our pace of development, by most measures has been accelerating through that time. And I'm kind of curious how to interpret that. Is it kind of a measure of acceleration? Is it, what people pick up on is if the rate is changing, because we're kind of in this, maybe it is a consistent high rate of development and people have gotten used to that high rate over the last 3 years. Is that how to think of that? Or, because otherwise I can't really make sense of that one.
Well, in part, I think what we're seeing is people's attitude about and sort of opinions related to housing are changing. Right? It used to be, when we would do these surveys, if you talked about sort of affordable housing, you got a knee-jerk no, right? Because people were thinking sort of Section 8 housing, and it just wasn't a hot button. Now, the whole term affordable housing means something completely different than what it used to. And over the last, 6 years or so, there's been this growing recognition that, okay, we don't have enough housing to support, sort of the population that we have. It's become unaffordable for large segments of the population. And so there's this willingness to sort of accept that we need more housing if our kids are gonna, hope to be able to afford a home, that kind of thing. And so I think that's part of what's playing in here, right? Because I've seen this also in other communities where there's just growing recognition that we do not have enough housing for everybody, and it's become quite unaffordable for many groups. So that can be part of it too, and it's been a more recent thing, and it sort of jives with the timing of what we're seeing here.
Got it.
That might help explain why, even though the pace of your development is the same, the concern about it has gone down.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's useful feedback from our community, so I appreciate that color. And then maybe I could have dug into your full report, but what do the asterisks on 2023 mean on those numbers? Do you know offhand?
Statistically significant change from
Okay. Got it. Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Dugan. I do not see any other hands raised. Let's turn to public comment. Crystal, is there any public comment on this item?
I do not have any hands up.
Okay, I think that's it. Dr. McLarney, thank you so much. Oh. Okay. Councilmember McDowell.
Don't sound too excited there, Mayor. Jeez. I just wanted to, with your permission, thank you.
Of course, please go ahead.
Thank you. I thought that having the survey data, I think, is a really good way for us to double check that our strategic work plan is on track. And I feel like the call outs to infrastructure and affordable housing, the bike lanes and sidewalks was really good for us to see this alignment. I did want to just call out the portion on childcare. I really appreciated the data on childcare. It was kind of at the end of the report, and I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to share it with the community. So prior to the pandemic, 27% of respondents found it very difficult to find childcare. During the pandemic, that raised to 37%. But in the past 2 years, those who found it very difficult, it increased quite a bit to 50%, and another 22% found it somewhat difficult. So current data shows that 70% of parents are finding it really hard to find childcare. So that also gives me some satisfaction that we as a council and as a city are continuing to work on childcare. It's obviously still a big need in our community, and I just wanted to call that out. So thank you.
Of course, are there any other comments from council? Okay. Go ahead.
After how you treated her, no.
Wow. All right. With that, I will turn to agenda setting. I don't see anything on agenda setting. So now we will go to adjournment. And we are going to adjourn. I'll wait for Crystal to get the photo up. In memory of Marissa Malatesta. So tonight we are adjourning our meeting in memory of Marissa Malatesta, who passed away earlier this month at the age of 93. You would never have guessed it if you hadn't spent any time with her. I had the opportunity to meet Marissa in 2018 when I was first running for city council. And when you were running for office, you meet a lot of people, but by far, Marissa was the most memorable person that I met ever campaigning. And I'm really happy that I maintained our friendship. Her joy and energy were amazing. She was very active at the ACC, serving as a front desk volunteer, a Friday breakfast check-in person, participated in the Pedro tournament, mahjong, and was described as the Wednesday ice cream queen, which I witnessed firsthand. Marissa would collect the dollar for the ice cream and make sure that nobody ever got more than $1's worth of ice cream. So when Sequoia Villages came around, she was the first person to sign up. I love coming to the ACC in hopes of seeing her and having an opportunity to chat. She would always lift your spirit, and I and many others will miss her infectious smile and joyful personality. So on behalf of the City Council and our city staff, I want to extend my condolences to Marissa's family and adjourn the meeting tonight in her